build a new gaming PC, and I'm super excited for this one, as today I'll be doing something just a little bit different. I'll be combining a water-cooled RTX 4090 with one of the hottest running, most powerful CPUs on the market, and one of the most interesting case designs I've seen all year. This is all going to combine to create a powerful high-end gaming PC build that I'm hoping looks that little bit different. Let's do this. The Corsair K65 Plus Wireless is a 75% mechanical gaming keyboard with hot swappable pre-lubed Corsair MLX red switches. You get 2 wireless connection modes with both Bluetooth and 2.4 GHz and up to 266 hours of battery life for non-stop gaming. Customizable RGB lighting, Corsair IQ support and a programmable rotary dial make this a compact keyboard that has it all. Perky RGB lighting, a sleek grey and silver design, 2 layers of sound dampening and screw-in stabilizers round off a keyboard with plenty of features. Now, this video isn't going to be a step-by-step build tutorial, but I am going to take you through the whole process from start to finish to see what goes right and maybe what goes wrong. Oh, I didn't think this through. I mean, after all, this all-in-one liquid-cooled RTX 4090 is A, a little bit different, but B, is going to be quite interesting to install when we consider we've also got an all-in-one CPU cooler too. Now, both of these parts are for good reason. The 4090 is obviously the most powerful GPU on the market right now. AMD cards just don't come close, and at the end of the day, if you're building the best of the best, this is the only option. Now, one of the biggest problems with 4090s is they tend to be absolutely massive. I mean, you compare this card to something like the GeekaWhat Aorus Master, or even the NVIDIA RTX Founders Edition, and you'll see what I mean when I say that size really is important. Now, this card is also, of course, going to benefit from that all-in-one liquid-cooled approach. You still get a blower-style fans for things like the memory, but the actual GPU chip itself is cooled by a 240mm all-in-one radiator. Now, this card isn't tiny by any means, but it does fit well into the 2-slot form factor. That massively helps. And the radiator, which all comes sort of pre-configured, just helps to move all the heat away from the GPU chip itself into, of course, an area we can deal with it more easily. Now, the case, which is actually quite special, and I'll come on to in a moment, does support up to 1 280mm rad on the side and a 360 at the top. So we're going to leverage all of that and hope, fingers crossed, there aren't any compatibility issues. Now, for the best of the best GPU, you need, of course, the best of the best CPU, and that is where this comes in. The Intel Core i9 14900K. Now, technically speaking, there is slightly better than this. You could go for the KS, which is a binned and overclocked version, but let's be honest, this is going to be more than sufficient. Now, for me, 24 cores, 32 threads, when you combine that with the 4090, there is no better pairing. And after all, we're building something just a little bit special here. Now, as far as the motherboard goes that I'll be installing the whole build onto, keeping with a little bit of an MSI theme, this is their Ace Max Z790. Max basically just means it's ready for the Intel 14th gen CPUs. You're probably watching this thinking, James, didn't AMD just announce Ryzen 9000? They did, and while that's really exciting, we're not actually expecting to see a direct replacement or kind of successor, I guess, to the i9 14900K from Team Red. We'll have to wait until they properly land, and of course those X3D chips will follow later, but for now, the i9 is absolutely the best choice for this system. Now, this board is pretty stacked. As far as motherboards go, not always the most exciting component, this thing's got everything. Whether we're talking about the dual 2.5G Ethernet ports, Thunderbolt 4, or Wi-Fi 7, there isn't much this motherboard can't do. Also, plenty of overclocking headroom too. Not that, to be fair, the 14th Gen i9 benefits greatly from all that much overclocking headroom, especially when it comes to temperatures. The CPU market is a really interesting one right now, though. It's hard to know exactly what to recommend. This is obviously the highest end, most powerful option for this build, and that's why I've gone for it. But we're at a crossroads, right? Where we're waiting for Ryzen 9000, we're waiting for Intel 15th gen, which I hope's going to be good, but we don't really know. As far as memory goes for this build, I've gone for a 32GB kit of Corsair's Vengeance DDR5. This is going to be absolutely fine. If you want to do video editing, definitely step up to 64 gigs. 2 more slots as well, so you can notch up to 64 gigs, or if memory's really important to you, you could of course just get 2 32GB individual DIMMs for 64 gigs while retaining a bit of upgradability as well. As far as storage goes, this is where things get a bit interesting. Now, PCI Gen 5 is obviously faster than PCI Gen 4, it's kind of in the name, twice as quick basically, and you can get up to 14 gigabytes per second on the read and the writes. Now, one look at this thing and you're probably gonna be like, what the hell is that? It is ginormous. And you'd be right. Gen 5 SSDs have one massive problem, and that is heat. Now, the only people so far who seem to have got to the bottom of this are Corsair with their new MP700 Pro SE. Everything else has some elaborate active cooling solution with a noisy fan, which we don't want, or MSI's approach, which I actually think, to be fair, is the better one, a super large heatsink for great passive cooling. And if I'm being honest with you, I would prefer this to not have the massive heatsink, but the performance is really good, and in our benchmarking of all the different SSDs we've tested in the studio, this thing holds up really well. So if you don't mind its absolutely ginormous size, I actually think it's a pretty good shout for a build like this. We do need to remove the thermal pad off of the existing M.2 installation area. Then the drive, that looks a little bit better. I mean, it's tight and it's a bit snug, but it does fit. One more thing I'm going to do before moving this whole thing into the case, and that is, of course, take a quick look at the cooler. Now, this is the Deepcool Mystique 360. Now, when we received this cooler in and did our first bit of testing on it, we were really pleasantly surprised by the numbers we achieved. And that's why it rated so highly in our review. Now, many of you will regard Deepcool as a more entry-level brand in the space, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. But I was actually lucky enough to visit their factory a few weeks back on the way to Computex 2024. They've not sponsored this video, but huge shout out to them for the invite. It was fascinating to see how they make all their products. In fact, with coolers, they make their own fans, they make their own pumps, and they even said to me they've recently got equipment where they'll be making their own radiators too in-house. We walked through the paint shop where they spray all the rads, black or white or whatever colour you've ordered, and it was amazing to see how they manufacture not just their CPU coolers and heat pipes, but cases too. You guys will know I'm a big fan of Deepcool products on the channel, and more often than not because they provide great performance at a price that a lot of other manufacturers naturally struggle to compete with. Really great to see behind the scenes, and this Mystique, absolutely a superb choice for this build. The screen, as one example, is something we really like on this cooler. It's higher resolution and more customizable than others on the market. And in a day and age where everyone is putting a screen on everything, I have to commend Deepcool for their efforts on the Mystique. Sorry to interrupt, it's James from the future here. Since filming this video and visiting the Deepcool factory, there have obviously been some new issues around the supply of Deepcool products, especially in the US. I still think this cooler is an amazing choice for this build, but I'll link some alternative options below if you can't get hold of the Mystique in your region. Hopefully these issues can be resolved soon, and I'll leave an article link below which explains what's happened in just a bit more detail. Opening it up, you can see here the radiator comes like wrapped and pre-done. All the fans are already installed, so that's a nice touch. I think as well they've got an RGB version on the way. I'm going to change all the fans anyway, sorry, so we'll be removing those. And then of course in here is the water block and the back plate. Now, by the looks of things, the back plate's a pretty standard affair. So if I lift the motherboard up, quite heavy actually, and slide the back plate through, that's one job out the way, and then venture into this little bag of goodies where they've got these black stoppers. These are going to pop over each of the 4 posts sticking through, and the rest I can deal with a bit later. Not to over prepare, but I am going to take all these fans off the Rad 2. Normally I'd leave them on, but I've got these Cougar ones which I'm going to replace them with, so I might as well do all of that now while I'm here. I'm hoping that these Cougar fans will help to tie in the all-in-one a little bit more closely with the case, because we want the build to not necessarily all match, but definitely feel cohesive and a bit more vibrant. These Cougar fans are quite cool, so all you do is you just pull up these little notches on either side and then attach, this is the actual sort of like connection bracket, and the process is actually the same for then connecting fans to one another. So you've got to get in there, lift the little notches up, and then they just hook together. Oh, that's clever. Right, so I think the prep phase of the build is done. The next thing to do is look at the case and try and get all of these radiators and everything else installed. Now, the case is a little bit of a different one. I was at Computex just a couple of weeks ago now, and there's a lot of new cases, and to say they all look quite similar would be a bit of an understatement, really. The fish tank aesthetic has obviously taken over. Everything seems to be dual chamber, but this is a little bit interesting. Now, this is the Cougar FV270 or something along those lines, and it's just a little bit unique. It isn't a dual chamber case, so the power supply sits in the normal position, but you do get that like fish tank aesthetic, and you actually get curved glass not only here, but then also a tilt to the glass here as well. It feels a little bit more three-dimensional. The front of the case is then also kind of floating with an extra ventilation area for more airflow, and the interior layout of the case is really nice. So you still retain a really good intake in terms of up to 240s or a 280mm radiator on the front side, pulling air in, fan mounting spots on the PSU shield too, and then room through a 360mm rad in the top. As if that wasn't interesting enough, they also offer separately this, a turntable for the front of the case. Now, let me just show you how it works. So you simply push and remove this fan with one One Touch. That is an NZXT H5 style fan duct dedicated for the GPU. Realistically, with the graphics card layout I've got, we're not going to need it. And then they offer this instead as a replacement. It's an electric RGB turntable. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Why?
Why?
Well, actually, I think this is kind of trying to capitalise on the trend of everyone putting pop figures at the front of their cases. And of course, with RGB lighting and it spinning round, it's different. It's not for everybody. If you want the practical airflow side with the RGB, you've got it. If you don't, you can put the turntable in and you can easily replace them. Like, look how easy this is. Drop it in, get it lined up, push it down. And there's a contact connector that will automatically get power and data for the RGB through the bottom of the chassis. So it's really, really plug and play. I mean, you could probably do it while the PC's on. Now then, time to actually install the motherboard. So the back panel easily removes. Feels pretty solid. Build quality is really good. Cougar, again, a bit like Deepcool, more of a budget brand in many people's eyes. I like what they've done here. You do get BTF motherboard support, so Gigabyte, MSI, Asus with the rear connections, with the rear connect power and front panel. That is supported, but you don't have to use it. This board today is just a standard design. With this being an ATX board in an ATX case, shouldn't have any alignment problems. So this can just slot in. He says nice and easily. Oh, is this the ATX? Oh dear. Oh no. Oh, we've got a problem. Oh I didn't think this through. I think I'm going to be giving Cougar a lot of compliments in this video because it looks like they actually have a solution for my poor planning, and that is that this bracket that's in the way looks like it unscrews. Oh, that's clever, isn't it? So maybe this does support eATX boards. You just pull that bracket back to install the board. That's what I'm hoping anyway, otherwise we have got a problem. Oh no, this board is so heavy. There we are. And then this maybe closes. What a fit that is. Unbelievable. The only thing it seems to prevent is the extra 6-pin power cable. I'm not sure we're going to need that, but we'll see. If we do, I'm sure there's probably a way of just removing this. It looks like, yes, that can be removed if we have to, but hopefully I can keep it on and it will also act as an airflow shroud and a cable cover too. This is all fantastically clever. A few screws later and the motherboard is now secured. The top panel looks like, yeah, look how easy that is. Just comes straight off these little pop joints, really nice and easy to get in. And then it appears there's a dust filter too. Now, this is going to be in exhaust. So the dust filter is actually not required, as all it's going to do is introduce more resistance, basically. Now, looking at this top radiator mount, you can pull it out for easier installation of the radiator. However, I actually don't think we need to, and installing it in situ is going to give me a good idea in terms of how far forward or backwards on the rails the radiator should go. Now, the only thing to be aware of on the radiator front is this bracket. I guess this in a push-pull config could cause some compatibility issues. As I say, you can actually remove it and take it out, which is a good option to have, but it may not be compatible with all radiator installs. I'm hoping my standard rad with single push configuration should be okay. I take back pretty much everything I just said. It turns out the radiator can be offset far enough that this bracket actually becomes not remotely an issue for 360mm configs right at the front. I am going to go ahead and fasten the water block down next, and then I think try and install the GPU and get that in situ at the front of the case too. The graphics card is next, and I mean, for a 4090, it's remarkable how small this thing is. Now, in an ideal world, I wanted to go for a push-pull config and have the included black non-RGB fans on the rear of the radiator, pulling air in, and then also have these Cougar, like daisy-chainable fans on the other side, pulling air through. Now, my worry slightly is that might affect the turntable and the clearance. I guess if we pop the rad in, that's going to be the best way to check. Now, the tubes are going to go at the top when it's actually installed, so don't worry about that too much. I want to say push-pull might work. So those fans are going to switch to the other side, then the Cougar fans are going to go on the side that we'll see, and I'm also going to use this opportunity to add one of those RGB Cougar designs at the rear of the case too. I think that will tie everything really nicely together, even though there's quite a few different brands at play within the build. I really like this build. I think this is going to be absolutely sick. kind of tube and radiator chaos, but I think we're getting there. And you can see when the graphics card goes in, the whole thing's actually going to look, I think, a bit mad, but pretty cool. By the looks of things, this actually may switch around as well for a fully vertical GPU mount. So we're going to go all out in this build, and we're just turning the crazy up to 11. That was very easy to spin around. Now I've just used this Cooler Master PCI riser cable. That's going to go into the top slot on the motherboard. There we are. And then of course the other end goes into the GPU. So that's going to give us our PCI Gen 4 data and of course a bit of power. Then in terms of which slots I'm going to use, it's definitely going to be the two nearest the front. Now I think, can I get a screwdriver in there? Oh, yes I can, just about. Now, can I just loosen this one a little bit? Then our nice thin 2-slot GPU is going to fit, I think, into place. Look at that. I'm not being funny. How good does this look? It's something a little bit different, right? And putting this graphics card vertically does really help to actually tidy up these tubes when it comes to the radiator. So all these fans here on the radiator and intake, these are an exhaust. Now I've got the small job of cable management. So give me a moment, got all the power to get wired up, all the RGB to get sorted. I think this might be a bit of a headache. Oh, and the power supply, which is this, the 1000 watt PCI Gen 5 from MSI. I'm hoping it's going to be more than sufficient. Originally spec'd to 1300. I think probably overkill, but the i9 and the 4090, quite a power-hungry combo, so definitely something to watch out for. I've spent some time doing some cable management and getting this thing looking spick and span, and I have to say, I think it looks pretty clean so far. The next stage is getting all the BIOS settings configured, installing Windows, so of course I can benchmark the system. Now, I'm going to give it some power. Mash delete on the keyboard. The RGB's on and looking pretty sick already, but obviously some ability to customize the colors is going to make it look even better. I'm hoping, as it works through all these memory training modes, that we're going to get a BIOS message in a moment. We can sort out all of our XMP settings and everything else in the BIOS. Beautiful. So we're in. So you can see here, got our i9 14900K, CPU's running at the expected speeds, and then in the memory profile, if we jump into advanced mode by hitting F7, jump into overclock and enable extreme memory profiles. Hit that onto enabled, and that's going to pick up straight away our 6200 megahertz speed on this Corsair RAM. I've also grabbed, although I appear to have lost it, a Windows USB, which I have configured to go ahead and install Windows 10. So in theory, if I hit F10 to save and exit, hit OK, this is where we find out if the XMP profile is stuck and if everything is going to play ball. And we're looking good. Straight into the Windows installation process. Everything so far playing happy. Now for the benchmarking, I'm going to be using this, which is MSI's 321 URX QD OLED. Now this is a 4K 240Hz monitor, so of course absolutely perfect for testing out the RTX 4090 in this build. Going to chuck Windows onto this drive, although it doesn't seem to like it. Let's maybe format first. Aha, delete any existing partitions and we're good to go. QD OLED monitors are getting more affordable. Yeah, they're definitely not cheap just yet, but to be at 4K 240Hz is pretty phenomenal, really. The whole Windows installation should take no more really than about 10 minutes. What I've also gone ahead and done is downloaded all the Wi-Fi drivers that I'm going to need for this system, so we can go ahead and get everything installed, like the new NVIDIA app for our GeForce drivers too, and hopefully in here, this should be what I need. So make sure to extract the whole thing first of all, open it up, and in theory, we should have some networking. Finished. Good. With the Wi-Fi sorted, I'm next going to download MSI's Mystic Light. Now, I've plugged all the RGB in this system up to the 3-pin header on the motherboard. And when you consider the graphics card and the motherboard are also both from MSI, that should make controlling all the lighting really, really simple. The only other piece of software I am going to need to download is the Deepcool Mystic CPU Cooler software as well. I did swap the fans out though, so we can control the RGB radiator fans on the motherboard software too. So it's purely just the screen that's needed when it comes to actually the control within software. Let me rejoin you in a moment when all of this has finally completed and we can actually configure the damn RGB on this computer. Promise it will all be worth it in the end, or at least that's what I'm hoping. Now, after a great deal of faffing about, I believe if we hit this magical button over here that looks like a chain link and go to, let's say for example, rainbow, and hit apply, in theory that should now control everything. Fans, GPU, memory, looks good to me. The real test is going to be though if we go for something like a lapped mode, something that's a little bit more complicated. Let's see how that tallies up. All goes dark. And you can see we've now got a synchronized set of effects throughout the build. Similarly, if we want to go for a solid color, let's say we want the whole system to be blue, if I hit apply, that should make everything blue now, including the memory, which is of course from Corsair, so that looks pretty sweet. The only final thing to do before jumping into the benchmarks is to open up our DeepCool software as well. That's going to allow for the control over the CPU cooler screen, and there are some quite cool effects you can do with that as well. As you can then see a bit more easily if I take the side panel off, you get these really cool system monitoring effects, everything from CPU frequency down to all the voltages. And you can even change this in the settings by going through into your modules, devices, and then adjusting exactly what's displayed. So from monitoring mode, we could also have media mode or recording mode. Recording mode's quite cool because it will then start to map out a graph over time with your clock speed and CPU temperature information. Getting nice and close up as well allows you to see just how good the RGB effects are in this system. I think visually this might be one of my best builds ever, but it isn't just the visuals that are important. We of course need to see exactly how this thing performs. So I'll rejoin you in just a few moments for those all-important gaming benchmarks. Moving through into performance, and the first game on the benchmark list is Call of Duty's Warzone, as usual. At 4K high settings with DLSS enabled and set to the quality preset, this build achieved a really solid 177 FPS on average. We all know how powerful the 4090 is, and this just validates what we really already know about the card. In Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 3 at 4K high, again DLSS on the quality preset, the frame rate was actually quite a bit higher, up to 217 FPS. Truthfully, this surprised me a little bit, as the two games are very similar and usually yield very similar frame rates. Starfield at 4K was next up, again testing at high settings, and this time the build pulled in 114 FPS on average. Again, a result I was really pleased with, and to break through that triple-digit FPS barrier in Starfield is mightily impressive. Hogwarts Legacy at 4K is next, 98 frames per second on average here at 4K high settings. Frame rate less important in these RPG style titles, but still nice to see that the build does indeed deliver. Fortnite at 1080p is the next game on the list, 1080p competitive settings this time up, and build achieved a staggering 325 FPS on average. Again, a really superb result. Apex Legends at 4K high rounds up the Battle Royale testing. Here the build wasn't quite as high as Fortnite, but still very strong at 250 FPS on average, while the final title I tested to really push the DLSS 3 and ray tracing muscles of this build was Cyberpunk 2077. Here at 4K high, DLSS on the quality setting, and frame generation on, and the build achieved over 100 FPS, 113 frames per second to be precise. All in all, this build performed well, temperatures were good, performance was top tier, and you really can't ask for much more, even if it is very expensive. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to get subscribed, drop a like rating or a comment if you've got any thoughts or feedback. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.